John 14, verses 15 to 21. If you love me, obey me, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another comforter, and he will never leave you. He is the Holy Spirit, the Spirit who leads into all truth. The world at large cannot receive him, for it isn't looking for him and doesn't recognize him, but you do, for he lives with you now, and someday shall be in you. No, I will not abandon you or leave you as orphans in the storm. I will come to you. In just a little while, I will be gone from the world, but I will still be present with you, for I will live again, and you will too. When I come back to life again, you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. The one who obeys me is the one who loves me, and because he loves me, my Father will love him, and I will too, and I will reveal myself to him. And the second reading is from Acts 17. Paul speaks at the Areopagus, the high court of the Greeks. He acknowledges the religious devotion of the Greeks and notes their tradition of including a temple for an unknown God amongst all their gods. He proclaims to them the one true God who is known but invisible, the God who is in all things. So Paul, standing before them at the Mars Hill Forum, addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious, for as I was out walking, I saw your many altars, and one of them had this inscription on it, to the unknown God. You have been worshiping him without knowing who he is, and now I wish to tell you about him. He made the world and everything in it, and since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples. And human hands can't minister to his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything and satisfies every need there is. He created all the people of the world from one man, Adam, and scattered the nations across the face of the earth. He decided beforehand which should rise and fall and when. He determined their boundaries. His purpose in all of this is that they should seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and are. As one of your own poets says it, we are the sons of God. If this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol made by men from gold or silver or chipped from stone. God tolerated man's past ignorance about these things, but now he commands everyone to put away idols and worship only him. For he has set a day for justly judging the world by the man he has appointed, and has pointed him out by bringing him back to life again. The word of God.
I imagine a lot of things, but I imagine the Apostle Paul coming to town here on a Sunday morning, and he looks around and he sees all the churches, and he comes into one of them, might even be ours, comes in the front door, and he sits down and he looks around, and he says, I see that you're religious. And then proceeds to talk about how important it is to remember that the one true God isn't in a building, but is out there. So I don't for a moment think that there's any, even a note of sarcasm in Paul saying, I see that you're religious. When he tells the Athenians he thinks they're religious because he sees all of their idols and he sees all of their temples. I think he truly is appreciative of the fact that they are religious. And now he wants to tell them something very important. So The first thing we need to know about this little story, though, is that the Greeks, of course, had a god for everything. And so in order to compensate for the fact that sooner or later they're going to miss somebody, and gods notoriously got annoyed if you missed them, they had a separate temple for an unknown god, just in case you don't want to miss anybody, right? So if you did, you could always say, "Hey, that's yours over there." That's what Paul is picking up on when he sees this temple of the unknown God. He knows that it's not the God that he wants to tell them about. He knows that. And yet, maybe it is. Because, as he points out, the one true God cannot be confined to a temple or a building, a place. It's not a thing. Are you religious? Let me ask that question slightly differently. Do you change your answer to that question depending on who's asking it? So that's why I mentioned about I don't think Paul was being sarcastic. Because it'd be really easy for us to go, oh, he was just pagans, you know. I don't think so at all. And I think, see, that's the thing. We've come to this point where, depending on who's asking the question, we think if somebody asks us if we're religious, we wonder why they're asking and what they mean by that question, because what do you mean? What do you mean? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How shall I answer that? Well, I get actually quite a few people who say to me, I am not religious. Not me personally. They say, I am not religious. And quite often it's in a context where you want to be really careful how you respond. For instance, a family about a celebration of life. Or someone celebrating a wedding. Or a life event. And they say, we want to have a minister involved because we believe. We believe in God. We're spiritual people, but we're not religious. And so I say to them, that's okay, I'm not religious either. Just let that sink in for a minute while some of you decide whether or not I should be fired. But let me tell you what I mean, though. I think the issue here is that I'm responding to their question as if I understand what they mean by religious, and they are asking the question expecting me to answer from my perspective of what's religious. Because I wear the funny outfit and I go to church, I must be religious. And that isn't what religious is to me. I think what religious is probably what it is to them, but they've decided that it's something different. Now, I know I'm making a whole lot of assumptions, so let me break that down a little bit. I think the vast majority of people who say they are spiritual but not religious mean, I don't go to church. I don't like the organization. I don't like the institutional stuff. I don't like the stuff. I can find God outdoors on a beautiful day, like today. Probably on a golf course. No, I'm kidding. But there's where we go right away, isn't it? We go right away to, we have to be sarcastic about it because we're a little uncomfortable with that question of religious. What does it mean to be religious? Because we think what it means is going to church. We think what it means is all the symbols and the signs. We think it means reading your Bible every day. We think it means stuff that it just doesn't mean because we've learned it means that. I think Paul knows that in the story. I think he knows that. And I think he wants to show them something different, something new. When I say I'm not religious, I'm still on thin ice, aren't I? When I say I'm not religious, I mean, I grew up, I was choir boy in an Anglican cathedral choir. I grew up in a place where liturgy, the act of church, was significant. I mean, we're incense and everything kind of stuff. And that has meaning for lots of people. It really does. And I think it did for me. My view of it has changed somewhat. I am not in any way trying to say that the manner in which we do church, build our buildings, order ourselves, sitting in all perfectly straight lines staring at the front, is bad. I'm not saying that. I'm really not. What I am saying is that there's lots of people who feel it is. And that doesn't mean they're wrong either. What it means is that for some people, this has meaning. It does. And frankly, we should be telling people it has meaning for us if it does. But there are a lot of people for whom it doesn't. Does that mean that God is not speaking to them or they are not speaking to God? No, it does not mean that at all. Here's an interesting, since Sybil read from a translation that calls it that. The Areopagus, or however you pronounce that word in Greek, actually translates literally as Mars Hill. Does that name mean anything to anybody? Because in Greek, the Greek mythology story is that that's where Mars was tried for the murder of another god. But Mars Hill is famously a huge megachurch in the U.S., where Rob Bell was once the pastor, amongst other people. But it's a huge megachurch in which several thousand people sit in stadium seating staring at a screen at the oh, wait. But that is their way, and a lot of people like that because it means something to them. There are a lot of people for whom their way is not this. There are a lot of people for whom their way is this, but they see a way forward that could be different, that could be change. Am I suggesting that we can reach everybody all at the same time? I am, but not by doing all the same thing. By simply recognizing what I think Paul recognizes too, and Jesus, I'll get to that in a second, which is God speaks to us individually, perhaps, but as the oneness that brings us together. There is a way for us to create community in that. And for some of us, it will be like this. And for some of us, it will not. For some of us, it will be something different. For some, it might be glorious Gothic cathedrals with classical music and hymns from the 1500s. I mean the century, the 1500s. For others, it'll be perhaps sitting in a big theater-like environment where they sing much more contemporary songs. There's a band. The minister's really, or the pastor's really hip and cool and probably has tattoos. Okay. Just wears jeans and a t-shirt, comes out and kind of talks to you like this kind of thing. You can see that there's elements in what we do on a regular Sunday morning, just here, there's elements of those things, isn't there? There is. And some of those things have meaning to people. But there's there are people who are not reached by that and are struggling to find their way to God. So how do we reach them? See, I think as more we worry about whether or not the institution of church is going to survive, we're almost locking ourselves into survival of the institutional church instead of the vision of what church can be for all of us as we grow as individuals. Because it's not in here, is it? There's many churches, and some people may recognize this as in fact, in Bashaw, they talk about being a 7-day-a-week church. Here, I'm sure we could say, you'd recognize that right away, stuff's happening here 7 days a week, here in Ponoka. There are other churches that will go, we're a 7-day-a-week church because stuff happens every day. We do stuff every day. Yes, we do. But so do you, and this 7-day-a-week isn't what makes us church. What makes us church is you living your lives out there from what we have done together here, what we have learned here, what we have gained from this community. This community is what gets shared out there. That's church too. So how are you sharing that? We watched a little video last week or the week before. Chuck Knows Church talks about evangelism, in which there was a little scene where the two people are talking and the guy's trying to invite her to come to church. You might remember it. And the very first thing he says is, "We have great stained glass windows. I think you'd like that." Well, that's great, and maybe, absolutely. But what about all these people? What about all of the other things that we do as a community? What about the very aspect of community? What about that? How does that speak to you? Because being religious isn't just about form and process and institution. It isn't. It's also not just about spirituality, our own individual, unique connection to God. It's not just to that either. The two things work together. Because I think religion is the form that we put on our belief. We created, religion is totally human-made. It was not made by God. It may well be inspired, but we made it. We made it as a way of putting a form and a structure around our belief so that we can hopefully understand it better and learn more and grow more. Sometimes it goes the other way, because religion can also be extremely manipulative and controlling. And I don't just mean that historically. There are a vast number of people who will tell you that they're spiritual but not religious, and what they mean is they've had a connection to a church in the past and it did not go well, so they don't go anymore. It's not just the form and the structure. There must be a spirituality to it. It's not just the spirituality. In order to grow and learn, in order to build relationships with each other, we need to put some form on it. That form, by the way, can change and grow as well, which is sometimes where we get stuck over here, isn't it? Quite often, how we change in terms of our form and structure as a church, as an institution, is reactionary. In fact, sometimes, since we're the United Church, we can kind of say this. I can't speak for other denominations, but sometimes it's reactionary, and sometimes it's a leap so far out in front, people leave. Right? Sometimes it's both of those things. But we need not just form and structure, we need spirituality too. We need both. And we need both to be alive, to be creative and changing and spirit-filled. Last Friday, went to a production of Jesus Christ Superstar in Edmonton. That was really a really good show. It was a really good show. I happened to have gone to this with a bunch of other people, one of whom was famously Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar, when the Bashaw Community Theater did Jesus Christ Superstar. There is something about doing a show in a church like that changes the dynamic a little bit. There's something about the people being involved in a show like that for whom there's meaning in the story, and people for whom they're just learning the story, being involved together. There's something about creating something like that that turns it into something different. The show was really good. I thought it was a really good show. I have some theatrical issues that I'd take issue with, but generally speaking, I thought it was a really good show. Have I said it was a really good show enough times to make the point that it was a really good show? But wait a minute, what's that story about? Last year, a little touring production of Godspell, and I remember the guy who was Jesus in that saying one of his friends had said, had asked him, "Oh, you're in Godspell. I didn't know you're religious." What? Well, see, this is because we think we know what religious is, and we've decided somehow that religious is just form and structure. It's just signs and symbols. For some people who've had a negative experience of it, it may also be that negative experience. It might also be the hypocrisy of all those signs and symbols and great buildings and not living what it means. But that shouldn't mean that it is dismissed entirely. Just because somebody doesn't want to come to church on a Sunday morning doesn't mean that we should dismiss their sense of spirituality or their sense of wonder at God either. Because we need both of those things, remember? So, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about that? We need to connect with each other. We need to find a way for spiritual people to understand that maybe that structure and stuff is not exactly, maybe you should try it, because maybe it's not exactly what you think. And by the way, while you're trying it, how about some input on what might be meaningful for you? Because that's really how communities get created. It isn't, sadly, it isn't always, if you build it, they will come. Sometimes you need 2 or 3 people to come together in order to build something. But we also need to be aware that in order for that process, that structure, that institutional part to still be meaningful, it needs to be fluid enough to grow and change. You know, before they settled in Jerusalem and built the temple, and when the Hebrew people wandered with the Ark of the Covenant, wherever they went, they built a temple. It was made of fabric. They built this thing that with posts. It was kind of like just a big tent. But then when they settled in Jerusalem, they built the Temple of Stone, because that's where God lived, you know. I always think that's such an important metaphor for us to remember, because as long as they traveled and they had a tent, if the wind blew, the building moved. And if they needed to move the building, they could always take it down and go somewhere else. It was mobile, it was alive. But the moment they settled in Jerusalem, it was built of stone and it went nowhere. Well, till they were conquered by the Romans and the Romans destroyed the temple, but that's neither here nor there. They built this thing of stone and went nowhere. It's where God lived. Which do you think the church should be? See, I think it should be the tent. I really do. Because it's alive, it moves, you can take it everywhere. See, I think when Paul talks to the Athenians and he says, I see that you're religious because I see all these buildings. You can bet he saw what was going on in the street too. He wasn't dismissing that. He wasn't saying, oh, you must all be wonderful people. He was just saying, I see you're religious because you got buildings. We cannot be known as religious simply because we have a nice building, or that we meet at a certain time, or we sing certain songs, or we order our service in a certain way. This is one of those moments where I would love to sing completely not at all sarcastically, they'll know we are Christians by our love. That must be how we are known. Not for our structure and our form, by our love. How shall we do this? Well, this whole time I'm assuming the screen behind me has been blank. That's because I was looking for something that I could put on the screen that would be representative of this passage from John's Gospel where Jesus says, don't be afraid. There's a way to God. And by the way, while I am gone from you, I will ask God to give you another comforter, an advocate. I will not leave you alone. This is the Spirit of truth. So this is not the moment like on Pentecost, we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit and all that kind of stuff, and it's like wind and fire and a blah, blah, blah. That's great, super. But here's the moment at which Jesus says, there is a presence that is always with you. It is the Spirit of truth. The advocate, the comforter is the language that we usually hear in translation. There's a word for that, and here's where I'm coming to the screen. There's a word for that, which is paraclete. Paraclete. It's the word that means, a Greek word that means advocate or comforter. Someone who is with you, who accompanies you. Paraclete. Do you know what you get if you Google image the word paraclete? Body armor. You get pictures of body armor because there's a company in the US that manufactures weapons and body armor, and it's called Paraclete. I cannot imagine why they chose that name. Oh, yeah, I guess I can. But that's, oh my goodness, that's so wrong. But I could not find an image that goes with what Jesus means here. Because he doesn't mean body armor. He doesn't just mean protection. He means life. He doesn't just mean someone who will be there, something that will protect you and comfort you. He also means something that will inspire you and engage you, that will connect you with others. It's not just a spirit of wind and fire and tongues of fire, flame, wind. I think I covered all of that, didn't I? It's not just that. It's the Spirit that inspires us to engage each other in every way, not just in super exciting and joyful ways, in every way. Because it needs to be part of everything. All of that form and structure, all of that process and everything, all of that loving and spiritual sense of connection to all of creation. That's the power that connects us. The love, the grace, the Spirit that is in all of us. It is in us and connects us to others. Maybe you're religious. Maybe you're spiritual. Can we be both of those things? Please, can we be both of those things? Please, can we find a way to engage all of those things in a way that helps us grow and connect to each other? Spiritual and religious.